Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Lisa and I are coming together again to do another one of our segments that we call Sacred Marriage, and also to do another one of our segments of a sort of sub-series within Sacred Marriage that we call Sacred Marriage Under Fire. Sweetheart, thank you for doing this.
My pleasure.
It is a difficult thing. You know, I confess that it's not always my habit. It should be, but it's not always my habit before I sit down to record to say a prayer. Mm-hmm. I do ask for God's blessing at night and things like that, but it's not always my habit. And yet we did just pray together for God's blessing and that the gospel would shine forth, that God would be glorified, because we're going to continue to talk openly and honestly. When we left off, we were talking about, our previous segment on this particular series, we talked about our spouses being unfaithful to us, and that's one kind of assault on marriage, but it wasn't and hasn't been the last one that we have lived through. In fact, when we came together after we were free to marry, we've continued to have some of those struggles, some of which were somewhat of a surprise to us. You know, I remember telling you before we were married how warmly welcomed you were going to be by the children that I still had in my home. And that was not the case, was it?
No.
No. That's very calm and gracious of you. I'm sort of doing a little bit of English understatement when I say that was not the case. It was not good, and it was ugly, and it was extremely painful and unpleasant. And it hasn't ended, has it?
It hasn't.
I mean, we just celebrated our 4th year anniversary of our wedding ceremony, and in many ways, it's a joyful celebration to go back and remember that day. You were so beautiful. You were very encouraging to me about it, but it's also a reminder of all that tension back there. Yeah, and all that pushback. We had family members on both sides decide relatively at the last minute, no, I'm not going to be a part of this wedding.
Well, not family members. We had our children.
That's what I meant.
Adult children.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Adult children deciding, hey, we're not going to participate in this wedding. We did have my father doing the ceremony, of course, officiating. Yeah, but it was tough. It was tense, and
I don't think the wedding was tense. I think everything building up to the day of was difficult. Now, on merit to the children, to see their dad move ahead in life, get another wife, express that he wants to marry her, and he had been communicating with her. Your kids were shocked, dismayed, and digging their heels in.
Yes.
And these aren't 5-year-olds. I mean, the boys were 6 and 10, easy peasy. These were later teens to young adults.
Yes.
And as mine were, I had a minor still at home, and I had some older adult children that were actually supportive initially.
Right.
But the conflict didn't come just because of that.
No, but I want to interrupt you just for 1 second, because where you started to go, I was thinking about going, and I made a decision not to in my head. You're absolutely right what you're saying, but I want to be very clear that it's no excuse.
Well,
that we should expect there to be struggle. We should expect there to be hardship, and we should expect there to be a question of loyalty towards the previous spouse. I get that. But that doesn't change our obligation.
Well, here's what I think is unique about our situation.
Okay.
And I think you need to unpack this for our audience because it's a looming question and it's a looming assault, which is prior to even having the wedding ceremony or our marital union. You were a pastor who was going through presbytery to get permission to marry me.
Yes.
And, there was a committee made from the presbytery. It wasn't presbytery itself.
Right.
And in that process, those men that were making up that committee had, one was your older daughter's pastor, and one, he was on the forefront to help her slow this down.
Yes.
Which to us wasn't slow because it was about 6 months, but you had been counseling me for a long time and
Yes,
you knew a
we've
lot
known
of the
each other.
background.
Mm-hmm.
So in that presbytery or the committee issue, that is where the assaults began. Because what we had was your older daughter had your password, and she got into your email and took the liberty to spread a 7-page report around that caused harm and made it look like her interpretation was the committee, not the presbytery, rejected you marrying me.
Right, and this is a little bit subtle and complicated, so I want to just go through it really slowly so people can understand precisely what you're getting at. There was a report written by this committee, and by the way, why did we go to the committee? Well, because if I engage in an illegitimate marriage or a marriage that is on its face adulterous because I or you are not legitimately allowed to marry, then that would disqualify me from the ministry. And so I was encouraged, and I went right along with it, to say, hey, would you seek in advance the approval of the presbytery to do this? If I were just a member of the church, I would have gone through the same process, but it would have been my elders at the local church, right? So, but I'm a member of the presbytery, and I said, sure, I'm happy to do that, because I knew your circumstances. I knew about
you had no doubt.
Yes, I knew about the infidelity from your husband, and so I knew you were free to remarry. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I said, okay, we'll do that. And I was absolutely stunned and shocked to see that there was pushback. And as you mentioned, sort of in passing, I really believe, not just with my oldest daughter, but I really believe that a part of what happened was people felt particularly protective of me because of
your own scandals that you'd already had.
My own scandals, my visibility, and my being a widower.
And it was brought to my attention by that committee specifically that they didn't want me to bring more shame onto you because you already brought enough shame on yourself.
Yes.
So, but in that process, then we have another caveat, a complete trajectory, finding out that the church that I was a member of...
Right, I don't want to go there yet.
Okay.
But we'll come back to that because I'm still trying to lay the groundwork of this key point.
So I interrupted?
No. It was a good interruption, dear. It was a good interruption. No, it was a good interruption. The thing I want people to understand is the nature of presbytery and how it acts. Because, yes, a committee was formed with the approval of presbytery to examine these matters. And over the course of months, I had so much back and forth with them, so much discussion with them, so many meetings with them, and they did create this 7-page document, which comes as a recommendation from the committee, which has no authority to do anything.
Right, it's a committee.
It's a committee bringing a recommendation to the presbytery. It doesn't speak for the presbytery at all.
Right.
It doesn't even speak for the committee. It's just the committee saying, well, here's what we come up with. What do you think?
Here's our analysis.
Yeah. And what do you think? Do you guys agree with us? And if so, you need to act in light of this. It was never approved. Never approved at all.
Right.
And yet it was passed around
as though it had been.
And as if people believed, yes, that...
Well, it wasn't rejected, and that's what you need to
No, it wasn't
hear.
rejected, but it wasn't approved either.
Right.
They never made the decision. So we have, to this day, people out there spreading this horrible accusation against me.
Oh, yes.
That I'm rebellious against my presbytery.
Right. And that you... Well, but what happened was, at that time... Your dad was counseling us.
Yes.
And we were very surprised that this committee wasn't just assessing my divorce from David.
Right.
They were assessing my 2 previous marriages. And then they decided they wanted to get reports from those men and gave those men 30 days to respond. Gave me 15 minutes in a meeting to remember 30-some years back all these details. So we have past husbands who, 2 of them, my current divorce at that time, and both of them living with, and here's David cohabitating with a married woman, not even divorced,
right? Saying,
well, she's the one cheating on me, and so we have this big dynamic, and the committee's just making it messier and messier, and so at the end of the day, you had a couple choices. Your dad immediately said, son, just back out. These people are not doing what the Westminster Confession says to even do. They're creating rules of their own. So that presents a hardship because, and you're moving away from this particular session, but quite frankly, it's the most freeing thing I think you ever did.
Absolutely. But, again, I did it under authority.
You did it under authority. That's right. They had to give you permission. Exactly. They could even say, RC...
You can't go.
Yep, you can't go. And you prepared me for that. Yep. I remember weeping, thinking, that's how that works in this circle? But it was.
Yeah. But, again, my posture has always been, and I'll send this challenge out on the airwaves. Find any decision or rule of presbytery that I broke.
Right.
Because I didn't.
And we've had to confront several of those people, very gossipy, large
audience.
Large audience, and not just large audience, but larger influenced people who are spreading rumors about you, that you are rebellious, and that your life went downhill when you married me, and they were even affirming that they knew me, that they counseled. Somebody I talked to once takes on the persona. We knew her. We counseled her. And that was shocking to me. I mean, the authority that these people try to embody themselves in, and they are reckless and destroying your character and have no shame, no guilt, no remorse for doing anything like that. And we feel that it's probably time after 4 years to share with you the truth and let our audience know that, again, this is where the assaults begin.
Yes, and let me say this, sweetheart. My perspective, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my perspective is that the hardship for me is not what people say about me. It's not what people think about me. But it is the loss of opportunity to use the gifts God's given me. Now, the other thing, the deeper thing is, it enrages me that they look at you as the problem. You are not the problem. What these people did, and this is family, this is presbytery, this is other people as well. What these people did is they presented you like you're a bad person.
Right.
I told you when we were counseling together that the infidelities that you suffered through is something that makes you a victim, not a bad guy. And it just boggles my mind. And it gets worse. It's one thing for people to gossip and accuse. It's another thing when they get formal enough that you can hang your hat on it, but informal enough that there's nothing you can do about it. And that's what we're going to come back to next time.
Okay.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Thank you, honey.
In today's Bible in 5 Minutes segment, we're going to take a look at the book of Esther. And Esther is just a highly unusual book. You've probably heard this. It's absolutely true and really, really odd that Esther's the only book in the whole Bible in which God is not mentioned at all. The whole Bible is God's book. The whole purpose is to tell us about who He is. But it's not here in the overt. But the way it is here is in the telling of the story. The book of Esther is one of those places where God, the great writer, writes a true story in history and then records it for us in Scripture. Now, the human author is unknown for certain. Some suggest it may have been written by Mordecai, who has an important role to play in the story. Others by Ezra or Nehemiah. I don't pretend to know, and I'm not sure it's that important if the Lord didn't want us to know. But that said, it is a great story with drama, with irony, with surprise, with the providence of God. The situation is this: the children of Israel are in exile, and yet in the midst of that exile, Esther becomes queen in Persia. Haman hates the Jews and wants to see them eradicated. And it is Esther's position and her willingness to risk her own life that rescues God's people and destroys Haman. Now, I got a confession to make. Later on tonight, I'm going to be leading a Bible study. That Bible study is called The Second Eve. I do this most every Monday night. You can tune in on Facebook Live at RC-Lisa Sproul. End of commercial. But the series we're currently doing is The Second Eve, in which we are talking about, as we already did one called The Second Adam, where we looked at what we could learn about Jesus in the role of Adam, the calling of Adam, the life of Adam, and all those in the Old Testament who pointed us toward Adam. Is it just possible that what we have here in the book of Esther is a story about Eve, about what Eve was supposed to do? Is Esther a type of the second Eve? Well, she's married to the king who loves her, just as Jesus is the king who loves his bride. She has a love for her people. She risks her life for her people that they might live, and in so doing destroys the enemy of his people. I think it's there. I think it's a great story about a great woman who, like so many of the heroes in Scripture, doesn't start out as particularly bold. I love that expression. I know it can become something of a cliche, but it's really heartening to me. The expression that says, God does not call the qualified. He qualifies the called. And so here in this account, we have this woman, this young woman, who isn't given to heroism, nevertheless taking her life in her hand to rescue, again, God's people, perhaps under the good influence and guidance of Mordecai, who does remind her, perhaps God put you in this place for such a time as this. I think Esther is a great place to remind us of the glorious truth that God is always at work. And let me just say this. This is one of those places where we can find comfort and peace when things don't go our way politically. It reminds us that God is in charge of everything. God put Haman in that place so that he could bring him down. God put Esther in that place so that he could lift her up. It's all God at work. And our calling is to trust him in such a time as this, which is that time where Jesus reigns. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.